Sup guys, today I'm going to be investigating whether the new Rainbow Destroyer Gun killed all the other Destroyer Guns, or if some of them still have a use. Well, I've already shown that the 76mm is better on ships that want it, but I'm going to be looking at all the other guns now. In this table here, I have all the guns that could still be relevant. The 138mm is eliminated because it's slower, weaker across the board, and has worse spread, so there's no point using it over the Rainbow Gun ever. Similarly, the 114mm is also eliminated because it's slower and weaker. I did not include the 128mm SKC because it's weaker than the 135mm against medium, but it could have potential if you're sure that you're going to be making full use out of the Pierce. That is a bit niche though and kind of hard to quantify, so I'm going to be leaving it out. These DPS numbers are taken from the wiki, but they use an absolute cooldown of 0.26 seconds, which is correct for the Tash Gun and Pompeo Gun, but not for the Rainbow Gun. You can check the video in the description for more information about the absolute cooldown of the Rainbow Gun. I should note, however, that the 0.16 second absolute cooldown is not tied to the gun itself, but the base cooldown, and it isn't exact if the ship has more than one gun mount. So if you use a ship that has lower reload and therefore slightly higher cooldown, the absolute cooldown of the Rainbow Gun might be higher than 0.16 seconds, but not quite 0.26 still. The actual DPS of the Rainbow Gun will be somewhere between the two rows. Taking that into account, we can see that on paper at least, its DPS is higher than that of the Tash Gun across the board. However, what is not clear is whether or not the slower bullet speed and lower range of the Rainbow Gun would affect its physical hit rate. Additionally, the 10 extra firepower from the Tash Gun is worth 3.33% at 200 FP, 2.5% at 300 FP, and so on, which could tip the scales, especially since it doesn't only increase gun damage but barrage damage as well. In order to test the performance of the guns alone, I used Curlew, who has 2 destroyer main guns, no auxiliary guns, and a pretty much non-existent barrage. All 3 guns are quite consistent, so I didn't feel the need to gather a huge sample size. Comparing the damage of the Tash Gun and Rainbow Gun, we can see that the Tash Gun wins by 6.3%. About 2.9% of the damage comes from the 10 FP, so if we isolate that, the difference in gun damage alone is about 3.3%, which is pretty much non-existent. This does suggest that the Tash Gun has slightly better hit rate, but when we compare the guns on ships that have functional barrages, the small difference in gun damage will not make up for the extra procs. Since the margin is so small on medium armor, the Tash Gun will definitely be worse against light armor, and heavy does not need to be considered. Therefore, the Tash Gun will perform worse than the Rainbow Gun on all destroyers against all armor types. However, since the gun damage alone is still decent and has more firepower, it can function well as an auxiliary gun for cruisers, who don't need a fast gun to proc barrages and can make use of the FP for their main guns. Next, we look onto the Pompeo Gun. On paper, it's ahead by somewhere from 27 to 38%. It only has an FP advantage of 5, but the bullet speed is faster by 70 units. When tested on Curlew, it came out as an increase of nearly 48% against medium armor. If we isolate for the 5 FP and then compare the damage, we can see that the hit rate of the Rainbow Gun is about 90% of the Pompeo Gun. This means that the Pompeo Gun is likely always better against strictly medium armor, but don't forget that the Rainbow Gun does proc a lot more barrages. So how much the Pompeo Gun will win will depend on the gun damage to barrage damage ratio of each individual ship. Next, I compared the 2 guns in a more realistic environment, on Shan and Yuudachi, both of which are quite meta relevant and would actually use the guns in practice. On Yuudachi, we see a difference of about 9%, meaning that the barrage procs brought the overall damage up by 35% to make up for the gun damage. On Shan, whose barrages are not as strong as Yuudachi's, meaning that the gun damage makes a bigger difference compared to barrage damage, the Pompeo Gun wins by about 12%. We can conclude that the Pompeo Gun is still worth using against medium armor on destroyers with high gun damage. But on destroyers with a higher barrage damage share than Yuudachi, like Janus for example, the difference becomes even more marginal. I also did test the Tash Gun on Shan, which as expected did lose out to the Rainbow Gun due to the barrage procs. This is on medium armor, so the Tash Gun would lose even harder against light armor. Anyways, that's pretty much it for this video. I hope that you found it informative, and see you in the next one.